AI isn't there yet, where we can have that real one-to-one conversation. But it's going to get there very soon. And I think that's the scary thing, is that it will get there in the next few years, where people won't know whether they're talking to a person or an NPC, right? Or some kind of a guided AI, or or an advertiser, right?
Hello, and welcome back to the Brand Next podcast. I'm your host, Justin Payton. I'm also the writer of the Brand Next newsletter, where we dive in and explore the use cases that are driving both adoption and positive change through Web3 and Metaverse technologies. If that sounds interesting to you, you can subscribe to the podcast using your favorite podcast service, or you can subscribe to the newsletter as well at brandnext.substack.com. All the links are in the podcast show notes. Today, we're joined by Alvin Graylin. Alvin is president of HTC China. He is vice chairman of the Industry of Virtual Reality Alliance and president of the Virtual Reality Venture Alliance. Needless to say, Alvin is an expert on VR, AR, XR, etc. But being in China, he also brings unique insights and understanding into the way that these technologies are being developed in that market. It's a market that we all know from the Web 2 space developed their own internet giants. They've become some of the leading innovators across mobile use cases, across commerce use cases. So I'm really curious and interested to learn how they're innovating across the metaverse. Let's talk to Alvin to find out.
Hello, Alvin. Thanks so much for joining us today. Great to have you here. I just gave people a little bit of introduction, but I can never do that as well as you can for yourself. So it'd be great if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in Metaverse, Web3, and give us a bit of background. We'll go from there.
Okay, thanks for inviting me, Justin. Always a pleasure. So I've been kind of in and out of this space for about 30 plus years. So I think in 1991, I started to study VR with Tom Furness. He's the godfather of VR, and have been watching this space ever since. In between, I've actually been in a part of the internet space as well as the mobile internet. But the last 7 years, I've been with HTC. I'm the China president for HTC, and essentially have been part of it since the launch of the first Vive, and have done quite a bit of work to help create at least the ecosystem in China and in parts of the world. I'm the president of the VRVCA, Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance, as well as the vice chair of the IVRA, Industry of VR Alliance, which is the only government recognized association for industry companies in the XR space. And also part of the ViveX, we've invested in over 120 companies over the last 5-6 years in this space. So I get to see a lot of both startups and as well as larger companies in this space, and have seen it grow. So it's an interesting time, and I'm happy to chat with you.
Needless to say, you've probably seen a lot and then some as this develops. I think one of the first things I'd love to get, clearly you've spent a lot of time talking about AR, VR, XR, looking at how that's developed. I think the interesting thing that we're seeing right now on top of that is this kind of view of what's Web3, what's Metaverse, a lot of people using the terms interchangeably. I see them as quite different, but I'd love to kind of get you to kind of explain where you see the difference and how you see these two things coming to life separately or together.
I think that's actually a very common confusion with a lot of people. Even within industry, there's some disagreement. But in general, I see kind of the Web3 space and the Metaverse space as kind of two different initiatives that are both trying to do good in different ways. Where the Web3 is really more focused on the decentralization of finance and the more using blockchain as its core technology. Whereas with the Metaverse, it's really focused on the 3D-ization of the internet and taking it from a text and video-based medium into a spatial 3D medium where people can have immersive experiences. I think that the two, there's going to be parts where the two overlap, and you will have some decentralized parts of the metaverse, but there will also be parts of the metaverse that are more centralized, like today's internet type environments. And there's benefits to both. So I don't think it's really about which is good or bad. I think there's going to be value in both, and in different countries will probably choose different methods of executing their metaverse strategy. But I think longer term, what we will have is going to be a much more interoperable open metaverse. But in the meantime, we're going to go through phases where there will be some closed wall gardens of platforms and companies in the beginning, and then maybe wall gardens of regions or countries in the middle. And then at the end, when people really see the value of a larger economy and being more interconnected with other economies, we'll be able to the market forces will create a more open metaverse. So it's going to take time, but I think that it will come, and it will be something that will bring value to a lot of people in the world.
Well, no doubt we're at the beginning, and it's going to take some time. But I think you made some interesting points, and you're being in China, I think probably you have some interesting perspectives. I'd love to kind of get your take on this. When people outside of China look in, obviously it appears from the outside to be quite different, at least in today's internet. And there are different internet giants. Do you see China when it comes to metaverse? I guess a two-part question. One, do you see China having their own metaverse giants as well as this space develops? And how's that space developing? And number two, you kind of refer to an open metaverse. So do you think China's gonna have an open metaverse as well?
Yeah, so I guess as with any technology industry, what we find is that there's always 3 or 4 or 2 companies that take a lot of value and become major players that seems to dominate a certain industry, and we see that in computers, and then in phones and the internet, and back in the day in the cars. So I think we're going to see some of the things in China for the metaverse, but I think it may not be the same players that have dominated the internet, and I think some of them will stay, but there's also a lot of them that have a lot of inertia in their existing industry that will make it difficult for them to continue to play the role that they once did, and not necessarily a bad thing in the sense of China probably starting out with a more centralized model, in the sense of it will create a test bed for the rest of the world, because having a more centralized policy means that you're going to have much easier to get alignment in terms of common currency, common ID systems, common avatar systems, common display engine, blah blah blah, which means that most of the companies in this space will actually share the common infrastructure and a common identity system that goes across these different worlds, and you'll have an ability to create that billion-person metaverse. And having a billion-person metaverse will give you a lot of different experiences and different lessons for learning that a lot of other parts of the world will take much longer to get to. And just as with the mobile internet, I think China took kind of a lead in terms of creating a lot of the business models and use cases of the mobile internet, because it got to that few hundred million users much faster than anywhere else. And we'll probably see that happening with the metaverse as well. So really, if we look at the China metaverse initially as a more centralized closed system, as a way to create a safe test bed for the rest of the world, I think that actually can be an overall long-term positive, because there will be new business models that will be created here that would have taken much longer. There will be new types of high competition because there will be so many people trying to get that single market. So the right type of ways to regulate, the right type of ways to pay, the right types of user I guess rights models, or the types of interfaces, interaction models. A lot of these lessons can be very transportable to the rest of the world. So overall, I think longer term we will get to that open metaverse that we talked about, and the market forces will take us there, because the value of a network is the square of its node. So a billion-person metaverse is very valuable, but a 7 billion-person metaverse is not 7 times more valuable, it's like 50 times more valuable, right? So I think that's really what's going to create that openness that everybody talks about. There will always be some corners of it that would be closed, just like today's internet. There will be parts of it that would be closed, but that's that's I think a natural function of the governments and the cultures that exist in different places. So I think long term it's going to happen in an open interoperable metaverse, and I think it will bring more good than bad to the world. So.
Well, I think when I look at the Western markets, I don't know what the right number is, but I was reading the other day about someone who was tracking 128 different metaverse projects and different metaverse builds of all kinds. And when you've got that kind of distribution and fractional behavior, we're definitely far from an open metaverse everywhere. I would say so. There's a ways to go.
Yeah.
But when you look at it now, and you're in China, do you get an inkling of what those kind of use cases are that are going to drive scale? What are people gravitating to already? What are brands gravitating to? Where do you see this starting to take root?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we're seeing now is actually a lot of different cities and provinces coming up with ideas for making themselves their area the metaverse center for China, right? So there may be right now in the rest of the world there's fracturing of different companies trying to control the metaverse. Within China, there's actually a lot of cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai and Beijing and Chengdu. They all have metaverse initiatives that are being directed by the local or provincial government to say, hey, I'm going to put in billions of dollars, put your headquarters here, do some test centers here, put some databases here, data centers here, etc. And I think they're trying to figure out how can I create the next batch of Alibabas or Tencents. I think they're going to initially start with things that are, I guess, probably more B2B focused, because I feel like that's where a lot of the initial value will be generated, because it's going to take time for the metaverse to get to scale for the consumer side. But a 3D, XR-based, spatial-based use case for businesses is actually where most of the industry is today in China. Right? XR is probably 70 to 80% B2B right now in China, whereas I think in the rest of the world, in the West, it's probably the other way around. The local provincial governments are essentially saying, hey, if you have a project that can create a virtual university or virtual travel or virtual trade or virtual fashion show or whatever, we want to help you make that happen. So I don't know, if anybody right now knows. If whoever tells you they know, I think they're kind of, they're a little full of it. So until we actually get some of this actually going and see the real reactions. But I think there's certain industries that are very suitable for it. I mean, entertainment is always going to be an important part of it, because having an immersive experience, having entertainment is a very natural progression. Also, kind of the social aspect of metaverse. Metaverse is innately social, because you're in an environment with a lot of other people in their natural form, and then you're walking around, you're interacting the way you interact in the real world, right? And when you're in a spatial space, you can walk up to somebody and start talking to them, and they will react to you in similar ways. In fact, we just did a study with the China Social Science Academy. And they found that people are 4 or 5 times more responsive in a 3D space to being approached by a stranger than in a internet or mobile space in terms of social. So they will react more, they will interact more. And so I think that's something that, like if you went up to somebody in some kind of a plaza and you ask them a question, 9 times out of 10, they'll actually talk to you and try to help you, right? Whereas if you did that in a social chat room and you approach somebody you don't know, they're probably going to ignore you, right? So I think some of these kind of behaviors will actually be interesting to see what happens in a larger scale. And you mentioned about brands and advertisers. I know that's kind of your primary audience. I feel like honestly, it may be a little bit too early to be overly focused on advertising as a core revenue model for this space. I think if we try to do ads too early, you actually will turn off people. And if you do advertising, it needs to be in a way that is not a lot less invasive. It's not like interstitial. I'm going to block off your screen so you can't see anything for 30 seconds. I don't think that's the right way to do marketing or to do advertising. And in fact, we did another study with Beijing University, and we found that advertising can be up to 5 or 6 times more effective in terms of getting awareness, interest, intent to buy, intent to take action compared to video or print type advertising. So in terms of effectiveness, it's definitely there. But in terms of effectiveness, that it actually creates a lot of power for advertisers and for the medium. So it's something that we need to use very responsibly. Because it's a way to influence people's minds. So I think from a advertiser or agency perspective, we really need to be careful how we use that power, because with power comes responsibility. So it may be actually the holy grail of advertising, because it is a full brain interaction that you have with your with your audience, and in some cases, we probably have a higher responsibility to disclose that it's an advertising. Because we did another study where we used AI NPCs. Well, actually, we worked with children. We said, hey, here's some little characters, and they are AI powered, rabbits or elephants or whatever, and go interact with them, right? And we had kids interact with them for a week. And afterwards, we went and asked the parents, how has the behavior of these children changed? And we were trying to get them to be more friendly, more responsible, clean up their room more. And we saw like 3 or 4x improvements in terms of actions of the types of things that we were trying to get them to do. So influencing them using NPC characters is actually seems quite effective in this medium. So if advertisers wanted to create NPCs that went up to you and said, hey, Justin, don't you want to drink some Coke? I've been drinking this and it's made me more healthy and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you would probably believe me, all right? And if you went up to, and everybody came up and asked you to do something, you start not to understand which is an advertising, which is your friend, and then because of an avatar, somebody can actually impersonate a friend and give you advice, and you can't really tell. Right. So it's something that can be abused. And I think as an industry, as an advertising industry, we really have a high responsibility to kind of manage ourselves and regulate ourselves in terms of not abusing this right or this privilege to interact on a much more immersive manner with the audience. Right? So I think those are. I mean, maybe I'm rambling a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of get kind of a few of those points across.
Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to interrupt. I think your ramble is fascinating, and I want a copy of whatever that NPC is for my kids. I could get them to clean their room a little bit better. So that would be really appreciated.
The funny thing is, we told them it was NPCs. It was actually researchers in another room pretending to be a rabbit or an elephant and talking to them, right? Because I think AI isn't there yet where we can have that real one-to-one conversation. But it's going to get there very soon. And I think that's the scary thing, is that it will get there in the next few years where people won't know whether they're talking to a person or an NPC. Right, or some kind of a guided AI, or or an advertiser, right? So we wanted to see how the reaction of these children would be to a fictitious character, right? So I think that was what we wanted to understand, and it's very clear that they can influence you quite a bit.
Yeah, no kidding. I think that when you talk about that, I talk a lot about identity and what digital identity looks like. Do we need to be transparent about it? Are we able to invent a completely new identity for ourselves? But as you say, this gets even more complicated when you start adding in the idea that bots right now might be more of a social media sort of thing, but they will take on they can take on, in theory, a three-dimensional form in a metaverse world. And all of a sudden, how do you engage with that? But this raises the whole kind of existential question around identity, how we manage it, right to privacy. How do you look at that space? Do you see anyone kind of laying a framework or putting a foundation in as to what we should be doing? Because it is a complicated question.
Yeah, it is a complicated question, and I think it is something that definitely needs to be taken a serious look at from policymakers around the world. China recently, as you know, have released their kind of data privacy laws that are very similar to the GDPR from the European Union. They've even recently released some AI kind of management laws, so that the consumer, the viewer of a content that is being served by AI algorithms has an option to turn off the algorithm. Right. I feel like that in this sense, China is actually ahead of the game. I haven't seen any other countries do this, and I feel like that actually may be a positive thing, because most algorithms today, particularly social network algorithms, are designed to make us stay there as long as possible, click on as many buttons as possible, and watch as many as much as possible, which may not be to the value or positive effect on society or to their viewers, right? But it's definitely helping the pocketbooks of the platform providers. If the consumer has a ability to turn that off, it actually probably is a better thing. It also probably limits the kind of social network or social bubble that we're in, where we get reinforced messages that the algorithm thinks we'd like to see. Right. And it either creates more hate or it creates more misunderstanding, because whatever you've seen, it keeps feeding you the same stuff. So maybe if we take away some of these algorithms, it actually will allow us to see the bigger picture or a more balanced picture. So I think that's something that might be interesting. Another thing I think could be interesting is the fact that I'm understanding in China, there's a lot less, there's more transparency in terms of who you are, right? So when you post something on social networks, you actually post under your own name, because everybody uses what they call real identity for your social network account. And if you look at it that way, then it actually creates a lot less hate, because a lot of the trolls, are essentially either bots or people who are hiding behind an anonymous identity to troll you or to create hate or to say things that they won't say in the real world. You're not going to go up to somebody that you don't know and start hating on them or flaming them for something, right? Whereas on Twitter or on a lot of other social networks, that happens a lot. In China, it doesn't happen very much. Right. So I think there's some value to having more transparency of identity. Now, I think having different avatars for different scenarios makes sense. And so you can actually have a more playful avatar or more cartoony avatar for your social environments, where maybe for work, you have a more realistic facial avatar that is scanned of your face for your B2B meetings, right? Because for a lot of B2B meetings, people want to be able to see you and see what you look like, and they there's partial evaluation of your, maybe your reliability or your ability to execute based on kind of how you look, and people have built up that kind of heuristic over their lifetime. I think it's hard to change and make people do their business meetings, as a rabbit or as a dragon or whatever, right?
There are a few examples. I've seen a great one where there's a video of a lawyer in the U.S. whose kids turned them into a potato, and it was during quarantine, and he had to present to the court, but he didn't know how to make himself not a potato. I
saw that video. Actually, it was a cat. I tell you, I'm not a cat. So I'm not a cat. So in certain situations, having a realistic face is much more socially acceptable, right? So, but having different avatars in different environments, in different worlds, it should be people's prerogative to do that. But then having, I think, a common identity and a common ability to bring your assets and your identity across worlds definitely helps to reduce friction. Because if I had to, if you essentially kind of like, you go to every website, you have to register, you have to create a new avatar. That wouldn't make sense. I mean, the way that the web works today is that I can go to any website. I can choose to register, but I don't have to register, right? And that smooths out it takes away a lot of the friction, So I feel like the internet as its current structure, even though a lot of people say it's overly dominated by a few players, it's a relatively standards-driven infrastructure, right? We have HTTP, we have DNS, we have the URLs, we have common threads, we have common security protocols that you can essentially create encrypted sites. So there's a lot of things that are already standards of how we transport data, how we transfer identity. There are some common login systems across different websites, etc. That is creating that glue that helps it to be fairly interoperable, even though it's not perfectly interoperable, right? So I think we're going to get to similar levels of friction, if not maybe even less, in a ultimate kind of final destination for the metaverse.
And I suppose you covered a whole lot of topics. I'm going to go back to kind of talking about avatars for a second, because I think avatars are almost a medium unto themselves, at least in Western markets. I see them that way, with a lot of people thinking about what does a direct to avatar business model look like, but also what we're seeing as far as kind of businesses moving into the space. And you commented on the Western side, there is a lot of B2C movement into that space, but a lot of that's coming from kind of luxury brands. It's coming from beauty brands. It's coming from brands that associate with identity very naturally, right? Because it's how you present yourself. Are you seeing similar elements as far as who's trying to play in that space in China?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of the Western brands going to places like Decentraland and buying a piece of land and then doing a show or something. But honestly, I feel like those kind of experiments are not going to end too well. There's no traffic in these places, right? And the idea of selling land, that's something that Second World or Second Life tried to do 10, 15 years ago, and it didn't really work out so well. And I don't see it ending up well here either with any of these current land-based type business models, because it has to have value. People have to have a reason to go there, versus you buying land next to Snoop Dogg and thinking that your land is worth more than somebody else, right? And I think what I see some of the brands doing now here is, rather than trying to create an NFT and selling for $100 million or $5 million or whatever, is that they're creating little 50 cents, 10 cents or free collectibles that creates an engagement with you to that brand, right? And McDonald's or Starbucks or companies like that are doing these things where they're giving away digital collectibles that don't really have a resale market, right? So it's a little bit different than what kind of a Top Shot or Bored Ape is trying to do, and I feel like that model is probably where long-term things will happen. Is that having an NFT from a brand means that you've established a relationship with them. It's kind of like a loyalty program. I have a airline loyalty program. I have a hotel loyalty program, and every time I go there, I tell them, here's my number. I volunteer to create that relationship with them because they create value for me. If brands say, hey, you have my NFT, now you can get free entrance in my offline facility, you can get extra bonuses on my online virtual world, and once a year on your birthday I'll give you a free T-shirt or whatever, right? Then some people will choose to do that. But the current models are based on having $50 or $100 gas fees, and then those kind of things just doesn't work. That kind of friction is too high. We need to get to a sub-penny type of gas fee model where, it's really just a utility, and it's something that allows me to have a relationship with you, allows me to have benefit and value from being associated with you, whether it's a practical value or it's an emotional value, it doesn't really matter, but something that makes the customer feel like I've gained something from being with you, versus just I'm trying to buy something and then tomorrow I'm going to try to flip it for 5x more money. Those kind of models will not last. So, and then we see that today with what's happening with NFTs.
Yeah, and I think if I compare that to the West, I would say that, I'm seeing more and more brands in Western markets come out with NFTs, but not call them NFTs. Call them digital collectibles. And to your point, try to figure out how do we make this a non-speculative asset, something that's going to be more about a brand relationship. So I think that trend is going to happen on both sides. So it's interesting when you say that. Are there any people that you think are kind of leading the way on that front in China that Western brands might? I always look at China as leading in some areas, somewhere we can learn from. So I'm curious.
I mean, I hear about brands doing it, but honestly, I haven't been studying the advertising side of it as much. I feel like most of the consumer brands are experimenting today in China, and doing these collectibles or trying to get into having even some of the government, like the travel bureaus, are creating little travel cards that people can have and stuff. So I think it's I don't know. I haven't heard anything that I would say is kind of transformational or defining a certain moment. But this larger trend of going away from trying to create speculative value to creating a long-term relationship with a customer through a token. I think that model is what I think feels like it's more sustainable.
Yeah, no, listen, that rings true, I think, on all sides. So it's interesting and good to hear. I know that we're running a little short on time, but I have a few more questions for you.
Okay.
One is China's always innovating; they're always doing interesting things. What's the best way for people outside of China to keep up with kind of how Metaverse is developing in China? Is it keeping up? Like, is there a way to keep up with what you're working on? Are there other thought leaders that people should look at? What's the best way to kind of keep up?
I mean, I think that if you use WeChat and you can come and join some of these WeChat groups, I know there's a lot of noise, and there are some English groups, there are some Chinese groups, but I think that's actually a really good way. There's hundreds of these Metaverse chat groups. I just joined a few of them just to kind of keep tabs, but that's probably the way I feel like for people who really want to spend some time understanding. Of course, there's always articles being written by multiple players, but I feel like a lot of the articles that the Western press is writing is usually a little bit biased in terms of their views. I've had interviews with certain Western press where they kind of trying to push a certain narrative on a position, and if I don't say what they want me to say, they don't report it. It's just unfortunate. But if you're able to read Chinese, or if you're able to sign on to there's a number of Chinese media that report on this space, like VR Tuolo or 93131. Some of these kind of weird sounding things are 87070, that are like media specifically towards the metaverse, and or like a 36KR, which is more of a China tech type of a news, or tech node is actually also pretty good. I think they're associated with TechCrunch in the West, but they report on China. And I think they actually have a more English medium as well, a version of their articles. So there's a number of press that can be used to keep tabs. But I think really connecting with more of the people on the ground versus just trusting Wall Street Journal or New York Times as the medium that represents what's happening, because most of those they have a narrative in mind. So
appreciate it. I'll be looking at some of those things and looking them up to try to, at least the ones that are English language, to try to
even some of the Chinese ones. Google has that translate button. So if you have the Chinese article, if you push the translate button, it actually it's it won't read perfectly, but at least you'll get the gist.
It's getting better and better.
Yeah.
So. And just to ask, when you look forward, do you have any kind of predictions? Do you have anything that you're looking forward to? What do you think is going to be the moments that you're looking forward to that are coming up?
Well, I'm looking forward to when we start having an all-day wear glasses device. I think that's something that will be transformative in terms of the relationship of people to this metaverse as well as to each other. And once you have a device that's on your head that is always present, there really will be no more need for a screen that's in your pocket or on the wall. And essentially all of our time will be filtered through this. Some people see that as a little bit dystopian, but I actually think that it may be a more positive thing than looking down at your phone all the time. Because when you're looking down your phone, you only see the phone. When you're looking through glasses, you still have the chance to see the real world, and you're looking up, and your neck is not being strained, and you have an ability to augment the reality that you're in with more valuable information that makes us smarter, versus looking at a small screen and trying to decipher and create your world in that little 6-inch screen you're looking at. I think the other thing is that the ability for a immersive environment also to transport you beyond your physical space is also something that is actually very valuable. Whereas you really can't do that by looking at a phone screen and looking at a 5-second TikTok. That does not transport you anywhere and expand your world. It kind of just more hypnotizes you and makes you forget your world. Right, where I feel like if you can actually, have a space where you can go to another country and connect with people in a different culture, in a different language, or if you can connect to an animal species and you go live in the Amazon and be with the animals, or go live on Mars and feel like what it's like to survive in a hostile environment. Those kind of things I think will transform people and change people's perspectives on life and on the meaning of life, and on what makes life interesting. So, and then I think a lot of things is it also allows us to learn things that we usually don't expose ourselves to. I think there are some studies that says 40-something% of people never read another book after they graduate from college, which is very sad. But they watch a ton of TV, and which is just kind of I guess not most TV, I think, is programmed to make you just sit there and accept and consume. Whereas I think books makes you imagine. It makes you open your mind. And if we can create worlds that are like TV shows, but they immerse you like a book. Because when you read a book, your brain creates that world around you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people are getting more and more lazy and less attention span, so they don't have the ability to spend 20 or 30 hours with a book. But I think if you can put them into a 30-minute experience that is fully immersive, that may be as transformative in terms of changing their mindset as reading a book. And I think a lot more people are going to be more willing to spend that 30 minutes or an hour in an immersive environment and have their minds changed or educated, and more so than people are willing to read a book. I was actually talking to an author the other day, and I said, "Oh, you're like a pretty famous author. You sell tons of books." He goes, "Yeah, I maybe sell tens of thousands of copies per book. It's not very many compared to how many people out there. And I think maybe only 5% of people who buy my book actually read it cover to cover, right? So a lot of them just buy. They might read a couple chapters, but they really haven't learned what I wanted to say." Right, so it's kind of sad that he's saying maybe some of the fiction books they get more read, but for nonfiction, if you're getting 10,000 books sold, it's actually a successful book, right? So I feel like if we can create experiences that really take a lot of topics that are informative or educational or just making people think in new ways, that's going to be really valuable in terms of making the world a more educated place. And then by being more educated, it actually reduces conflict, because the more you understand other people, the less you blame them, and the less you want to hate, the more you want to understand and accept. So.
Yeah, it'll be an amazing tool for empathy. That is for sure. If you can,
and then I think it goes beyond empathy, because I think empathy is really more about just kind of feeling kind of how they feel, so that you accept them. But I feel like it needs to be more than just accepting. It needs to be more about, now that I accept them, now I need to think from their perspective, so that how can I act differently to make this conflict go away? How can I, kind of like right now, there's so much conflict between, China and US, Russia and Ukraine, all these places. If people spent a little bit more time of, why are people doing this? Why are they doing this from the other person's perspective? We won't really judge them as much. And, I feel like there's too many misunderstandings. If you stood in other people's shoes for more than 5 seconds and really understood the history behind it, you understood the culture of what it means to them when these things are happening, and you wouldn't be doing the things that are inciting additional conflict. And I feel like both sides of the conflict needs to do more of that, and they need to better understand the other people's perspectives, not just feel sorry for them, but to really understand the mindset and logic behind the people.
Listen, I think there's high hopes in what you just said for the potential for always on glasses. So how much you work for a hardware maker? How much longer do we have to wait?
I think we're going to get, we like last year we released the glasses form factor, right? It's kind of like, I actually, because it's small, I carry one in my bag all the time, and it's, it's kind of this size, right? It's not that big. And we'll find that in the next year, pretty much every major manufacturer is going to come out with devices that look like that. For it to get down to more the normal glasses form factor, it'd probably take another, 3, 4, 5 years. But within 10 years, I think we're going to get there. And it will be the device that we will spend more waking hours in this device than we will outside of it. So, I mean, if you look at today, the average person spends something like 10 or 11 hours in front of the screen, right? Whether you're talking about a computer screen, a TV screen, or a phone screen, you add it together. And that's actually 10 or 11 hours a day, you're cutting yourself off from the world. I feel like that's actually unhealthy. Whereas if you spend 16 hours a day in one of these classes, but at the same time, more than half or most of your time, you're actually seeing the real world. And then you might have, 3 or 4 hours of immersive experience, but you'll have, 10 or 12 hours of augmented experience. I think that's actually the best of all worlds, because you'll be able to do things that you couldn't do before. You'll be able to see things. It'll make everybody super intelligent. And I think having a more educated society is actually the primary one of the prime characteristics of a successful, wealthy society is the educatedness of its population. And if we can make that true globally, of course, anybody can afford a $200 or $300, $400 device. You can be as educated as anybody else in the world. That actually allows for the concept of democracy to really flow, because the democracy can only work when you have an educated population. And today, even in America, I feel like the population is not as educated as it should be. So,
I definitely think that when you put a vote into people's hands, you need those people to be educated into that is the responsibility that we have. So this is great, and I think that it's a fantastic direction that we're going in. 10 years sounds still like a long time to wait, but it's going to be faster than we can imagine. And more change and more use cases.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it feel like it's going to be 1 or 0. It's going to transition over time, and certain countries, certain regions, certain cities will actually happen faster. Just like EVs. There's certain Norway is like 70% of cars are EVs, whereas the US is like low single digits, right? So it's going to happen in different places at different speeds. I don't think it will be, we need to wait from now and then 10 years, it will flip a switch. So lots of pieces of what I'm talking about will actually happen within 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think what was it? William Gibson said the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So I think that's going to be very much so for this metaverse future.
That is my favorite quote. I absolutely believe exactly that. I believe most of these technologies, the pieces are there. We're just not sticking them all together necessarily in ways that they distribute naturally. Whether it's Web3, whether it's Metaverse, we're seeing a lot of that. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I feel like I'm feeling genuinely excited about where this is going to go, and I appreciate that. I know now that we need to check in again in a year or just to see how we're moving forward and get your view then. But I really appreciate your time, Alvin.
No, thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad we had a chance to chat. So look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so
Justin.
much.
Thanks for joining, everyone. That was Alvin Graylin talking to us about the future of the metaverse and how China is developing and building in the space. China is such a huge market, such an innovative market. I'm always fascinated to learn about what they're doing, how they're building, how they're developing technologies. And it sounds like the next waves of development there are going to be fascinating and filled with opportunity. Now let's close out the show. You've been listening to the Brand Next podcast, where I talk to the builders, the innovators, the leaders who are scaling Web3 and Metaverse technologies and ensuring that it delivers on its positive potential. If you enjoyed listening, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like listening to podcasts. If you want to help me out, you can give me a 5-star review. It would be fantastic. I'd appreciate it. It does wonders for my reach. If you want to find out more and stay in touch and get more of the content, you can also subscribe to the accompanying Brand Next newsletter at brandnext.substack.com. The link is in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, take care. Bye.